Hey guys, so today's episode is sponsored by Baja Gold Co. It's one of my personal favorite salts. And Baja Gold is the world's most flavorful sea salt with naturally lower sodium and industry leading macro and trace minerals to support daily performance. Mamas, I can help you improve your family's health with my 5-week online course, Real Food, Real Families. It even has 5 weeks worth of meal plans. So check out nourishthelittles.com and use the code NTL10 for 10% off. Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, two millennial moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. Inclusivity, right, for all.
Right.
Okay, guys. So we are going to start a new series, a new mini series on the show titled, I didn't even run this by Corey, but this is what I decided to title it.
I love it. I'm so excited. It's such a good name.
Fishing for the Truth, How to Source the Best Seafood.
That's like a documentary title.
I
What
know.
are we doing? We need to make a documentary now.
Well, we don't know anything about fish, which is why we're bringing in the experts.
We just have a good title.
I know. And so stay tuned, guys, because even whether you like seafood or not, you still want to listen to these episodes because they're going to tell you all about how to source the fish. And we're going to hear some really cool stories from local fishermen. Okay, so all of that to say, today's guest is actually somebody that I'm really excited to bring on because I have been using her CSF, so community sourced fishery, for the past, I think, 3 years now. And basically, I purchase in bulk their fish and then it's shipped to Texas and I help distribute it to our co-op, whoever else is interested. And so today's guest is that fisher woman. I don't even know if that's the right term. Malena from Schoolhouse Fish.
Hi.
That's who we're interviewing today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right. Malena Marvin is an Alaska-based organizer, entrepreneur, writer, and artist. Together with her partner, Eric, a commercial fisher, she is one half of the Schoolhouse Fish Co., a small and independent business that markets their own catch directly to buying clubs around the U.S., which is what Christine is involved with. Malena and Eric have been catching and marketing wild salmon and seafood from their island home in, and we went over this, and this is how you pronounce the indigenous name of the town that she is in. I'm going to try and I'm going to butcher it, and then she'll fix it for me. So, Tlingit Ani. Yes? No?
Pretty close. And that's the name of all of Southeast Alaska, the
Okay.
home of the Tlingit people. And I can't pronounce it, the way it's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm trying. And Tlingit.
Tlingit.
Yeah. And so I'm
Okay.
on an island in the middle of that region, if you think of Alaska's panhandle.
Super neat. Okay. So you've been doing this for over 10 years with the belief in the power of going slow and keeping it small, sharing the harvest, and operating a business that helps bring people together in a world that often pulls us apart. How beautiful is that?
I know. I really liked that part of the bio.
That's really great. Okay. So, Christine, do you want to do the question?
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay. I came up with this and I thought it was kind of fun. So we normally start every episode with a question related to the topic of the show. And so today, instead of, I'm going to paint the picture for you. Okay. You're hosting a dinner party and you're inviting some friends over. And imagine that one of your guests hates seafood. How would you prepare it to convince even the toughest skeptic?
So what she means is one of your guests is me.
Okay. So, as you mentioned in the bio, I have a background in like making change and being an organizer and activist. And so a lot of that is persuasion, but a lot of that is also like being with people where they're at and not thinking that you automatically know better than them what's good for them. So if someone's not into seafood, I'm fine with that. Not everyone needs to be into seafood, right? In fact, I don't know that we have enough seafood worldwide for everyone to be into seafood.
Mm.
So that's fine for it to be a little bit niche. What I will say is, I think a lot of people have had experiences with seafood that's like pretty crappy, right? It's like been
Yeah.
in the supermarket for a long time, not really sure where it came from. Maybe it didn't come from the best place to begin with. Maybe it doesn't taste that good or look that good, doesn't feel that good. And that's sadly like a lot of people's relationship with um, like sustenance from the ocean and from the river, which is not good, right? And I think
I think that's similar to what Shannon said on our trout episode.
yeah,
Mm.
what I see in Alaska, having lived here for 10 or 15 years, is like as people come into relationship with the ocean themselves and they see um, fishing, hunting, gathering as a part of the culture, it starts to make more sense why you would want to eat that way. And when you are actually eating fish that is just coming out of the ocean, I've seen a lot of people who are vegan or vegetarian come change their tune because you realize, oh, I'm like part of this ecosystem, and it's actually delicious and makes me feel healthy. It makes me feel connected to where I live. So, in a sense, that's kind of what we try to do with the business is preserve that quality and that sense of sacredness around the fish, and so that when we're sending it to our customers, we're also sending that system of values and that relationship with the ocean and with seafood.
Christine, do you want to answer that?
I love that. No, that's beautiful. I've always been a seafood lover. My mother is originally from Ecuador, but the coast of Ecuador. And so I grew up eating a lot of seafood on the coast of Ecuador. So I've always loved seafood. But if I was going to prepare it in a way that I to make it so that a skeptic could enjoy it, I actually would go the dip route. I think, in particular, Schoolhouse Fish's smoked salmon is makes some of the best smoked salmon dip. It, oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. It's just delicious. But I like to mix it with cream cheese and sour cream or cream cheese and mayonnaise, and then dill and capers and lemon juice and a little bit of red onion, and just mix up that smoked salmon, skin and everything, into the dip. Oh, it's mouthwatering. I love it.
I mean, me too. Like I've been eating that a couple times a week for a long time.
Yeah. All right, Corey. Would you wait, yeah, where are you on this train? What would you do?
I mean, it is no secret on this show that I don't like seafood, which is, I know everybody's going to revoke my Maryland card for saying that, but like, I grew up on the coast. I'm from a coastal state, where we would have um, you would have these crab boils, like and now I live coastal, even more coastal. I live closer to the coast now, and I still don't like it. Um, I have never liked. I mean, it's like a thing. I just don't.
Yeah.
Ugh. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I am very much a person who will cater to whoever I'm cooking for, if it's like a party like that. Like, it's not my children, that doesn't count. But like, if if I'm having a party, I'm not gonna make something for somebody they don't like. That just seems insane to me. But,
Yeah. So
you
you're
know,
gonna take Melena's view and go
I'm
with
gonna make burgers
Grace. Yeah,
probably.
yeah. Just say I'm accepting the grace that I don't like seafood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, okay. So, uh, let's start with sort of your backstory, how you got to where you are, because you're not from Alaska, right? Or are you?
Originally from Southern Oregon.
Okay. So then how did you get to where you're at, doing what you're doing, um, being passionate about what you're passionate about?
Mhm. Gosh, it's like where to begin. But I
Yeah.
think like the through line for me, like since I was young, I've just always been very interested in the natural world, how beautiful it is, and how special it is that like it exists in this universe, and how important it is that we preserve that and we make sure that that's the case for future generations. Obviously, when I was younger, I didn't think we would be failing this hard, at stewarding the earth. But I've always been idealistic and motivated to move in that direction and push us in that direction, and that's led me to be an activist and an organizer, and also to be an educator. I did get a master's degree in environmental education, which is what originally brought me to Alaska. Doing that kind of work around here, also doing advocacy. For many years, I taught sea kayaking on the ocean for college students, amid other outdoor ed stuff I was doing. And eventually, I got an advocacy job here in Southeast Alaska, Tlinkarani, advocating for, running an organization that's advocating for environmental conservation. And that was cool and high powered and high energy. And I got cancer. And
Hmm.
after kind of a nasty bout with breast cancer almost 10 years ago now, I decided to kind of leave that world of activism and focus on building Schoolhouse Fish Company, because at that time my partner Eric, who was had been fishing full time for quite some time, was dealing with something that a lot of fishers deal with, which is international commodity prices all around the globe coming home to roost where we are, in the fishermen getting paid very little for their catch.
Hmm.
So he's getting pennies on the dollar for this beautiful seafood product that he's bringing to market, and it's kind of getting swallowed up by various middlemen and corporations before it eventually gets to a plate, often in poor quality. And I just, my fatal flaw, I know I can do this better. Like it'll be, I can replace that whole like chain of corporate markets with like a more simple relationship between us and customers.
Oh,
So
cool.
like with many large projects, you start with this like, oh, it'll be so simple. And then, 10 years later, you've learned, right? Like what it takes to actually make that vision be a reality. But that's what led us here.
How did you come up with the idea of a fish buying club? Or is that something that's kind of common in Alaska?
It started with just us figuring out how to get fish to our friends, right? Like people we already knew. What is the most efficient and kind of cheapest way for us to get you the fish? It costs a certain amount to ship.
Mhm.
And so we immediately realized that if we shipped in bulk, people would pay a lower per pound price. And so we just started aggregating the bulk orders. And that's, a way that we can use sort of a different model to reach people.
Do you mind explaining to our listeners who are not familiar, first saying what is a CSF and then also how yours works? Because, so for a little bit of background knowledge, how I came to you was a different fisher family in Alaska, and they essentially were doing the same thing. They were just, there were slight differences, but when they decided they wanted to focus on their family, and I told them, "Well, you can't leave me without fish," they sent me to you guys. Um, so I'd love to, yeah, expand on what CSF is and how yours works specifically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we are one of many, many small food producers around the country and probably the world who are kind of doing research and experimentation as to what a community supported fishery looks like. And it looks a lot of different ways for different people. Like the folks you were working with, it needs to work for your family. And we've created one version of a community supported fishery that works for our family. And we've looked around when we first got started at the different businesses who were getting going. I think there was sort of a wave about 10 years ago of, we call it in Alaska, direct market seafood businesses, where the fishermen's turning to create their own direct market. But that's also up and down, the West Coast, the East Coast, the Gulf Coast. And there are a few overarching organizations like Local Catch. Slow Fish is another one. that kind of network these different approaches to community supported fisheries. But ours looks like, we want to be in Petersburg, which is our town on our island in Hlinkarani, Southeast Alaska. You see me doing this because that's the hand for Alaska.
Oh.
We're right here. Anchorage is up
Oh,
here. The Aleutians are out here. Um,
okay.
but we're grounded here and we're part of this community and we have been for a long time. And so we want to bring economic benefits to our community, right? Not necessarily to ship the profits off the island. And so we needed a model that allows us to live here full time. A lot of fishermen solve this problem by like living in another place and importing their own fish and going back and forth. There are like many ways people do this direct market type of CSF. But for us, we want to live here. So we needed to get groups of people to order in bulk to make it make sense for them and to make it make sense for us. And so we just gradually evolved that model, I would say, in cooperation really with customers and people who wanted our fish. It wasn't like we sat down and did a bunch of interviews and brainstormed out 10 years. We just said, okay, how do we get you fish this year? What's the best way? And took people's feedback, and we're still doing that.
Yeah. So to expand on that, what Schoolhouse Fish does is they create crews throughout the US and they assign a captain to each crew. And that crew is in charge of finding family and friends that want to order fish in bulk. And then they place a bulk order. And the delivery window is usually from like June to November, something like that, right?
Mhm.
And each captain can choose whatever month works for them. So for me personally, I've chosen July and September. That's when I receive the fish. So everyone in my crew has to order their bulk fish orders by either July or November. September. And then they will ship it via like freight, but not no, sorry, air freight on an airplane. And then the captain picks it up from the airport and brings it to their house and distributes it, essentially.
And that's because we're on an island. So our options are Alaska Air Cargo or barge. Um,
And barge would take too long, right?
well, they have freezer capacity on the barges, but it would require us to be down in Seattle to meet the barge and then
Oh.
get it. It just becomes kind of a shipping logistics headache. That you're then dealing with barge and truck. And I've looked into that because the climate impacts are going to be a little bit lower, right, than adding cargo to existing planes that are already
Mhm.
going. But it's not enough uh, savings that it changes our calculus because the Alaska Air planes are passenger jets that are already happening. And we're just
Mhm.
hopping on increments of freight onto those jets. So it is an incremental carbon bump, but for us at our scale, it's not enough to like move to Seattle and try to route everything through there. But that could change. We don't know.
Mm.
Okay, so Christine, if people are in Dallas and they want to order their fish, they come and talk to you.
Yeah, actually, there's two captains in Dallas, right? Malena, I think
I think there's
there's
actually
myself, and
three.
then there's Elizabeth, or three.
Yeah, there's one more, but he doesn't open it out. It's just like his family and friends.
Oh, okay. But yeah, there are two of us, so I think it just sort of depends where you're located and if you want to drive to, my particular suburb to pick it up.
Mhm. We have
But
people all around the country do things in really different ways. Like we have folks down in Oakland, California, who bought a freezer, and the captain, her husband, is a maker, and he has a big warehouse, and they just plug the freezer into their warehouse, and people just come and grab it, you know, out of the freezer. We have a person in Austin who he will drive home from picking up and he will stop in four different locations and people just sort of meet him. That's wherever's closest, and he has them kind of tightly organized.
mm,
And then
Super interesting. So you've got it to where you're working with people who are, then also working with you to make it work for their communities. Sounds like.
exactly, Yeah, and that's what I think is my background as an organizer coming in and looking at how do I solve this problem of having this particular product and these markets all across the country that I know want my product, but it doesn't, you can see online, it doesn't necessarily pencil out to just go online and do regular e-commerce, right? I have to, if my minimum shipping is like $100, you want 5 pounds of salmon, you're paying $100, and you can do that. You can go online, and people will take that money from you and give it to
Yeah.
UPS or FedEx or whatever, and that people are actually making a living. But not everyone can afford that
Yeah.
kind of impulse seafood buying through e-commerce. And so, how do I solve that problem? I'm bringing my career as someone who has organized communities to make change, right? And the way that we do that is by networking small groups and getting them on the same page with each other so that they can make a collective impact. And so I'm just kind of using that same model to help me um, sell my fish from my community and kind of keep my values intact as well as I can as I do that.
Okay, so let's use that and talk about the affordability of seafood in general. And, because you can go to a grocery store or Sam's Club or something and buy frozen fish or even fresh fish, probably less expensive than you could buy it from you, I would assume. But, you know, obviously there's a quality difference. So how can we make, seafood, or how can we have this conversation? Maybe it's a change of conversation that needs to happen, but how can we have this conversation around the affordability or not affordability of seafood?
Yeah. It's a tough conversation, right? Because it really brings together some really huge problems in the way we've structured our economy and our society that are much larger than me and you and our needs and our businesses. But for the, on one hand, when you go to the store, it's not always very clear what it is that you're actually buying, right? Like
Mhm.
we don't have mandatory labeling necessarily for when something was raised on a farm or comes from another country or, you know, comes sometimes you see salmon labeled as things that it isn't a wrong species, let alone the wrong country or from farmed. And I know you've had farm trout producer on your show, but farm salmon producers are different than farm trout producers. They have different needs. And
Yeah, and we did talk about that a little bit on that show, I think.
yeah, so
Yeah.
a lot of times you see cheap salmon in the store. It's farmed, it's from Chile or Norway, and it has a really different nutritional profile and story than what we're selling. So you're usually not going to find wild salmon that's even in the store that's cheaper than what we are selling, even with our shipping. And I do check that pretty regularly.
Mm.
And so that's one thing. And then there is who produced it. Were they enslaved? Right, like a lot of global fisheries sadly are using factory fishing ships with basically indentured labor or people who don't choose to be there. And that's actually more
Oh,
prevalent
wow.
than we want to think about. So obviously, they're going to be bringing a cheaper commodity to market, right? They're not paying labor. I'm coming.
Gosh.
Wow, that's news to me. I actually did not know that.
Yeah, it's very
Oh my
real.
gosh.
It's There's an excellent book. I'll give you the title so you can put it in your show notes. That I do recommend. I want to say it's called Lawless, but I could be getting that wrong. I should have looked it up. But it's a cursory look at global fisheries and just actually what is happening because there aren't laws governing most of it. And so I'm coming from a place here in Alaska where we have actually a very robust fisheries law, and we're also operating under the National Marine Fisheries Service at the federal level, which also overlays, um, pretty rigorous regulatory framework for federally regulated fisheries, which would be halibut and black cod or sablefish. Some of these
Mm.
other types of fisheries, salmon are mostly regulated at the state level, and the state regulations are networked through regional um, efforts like Pacific Salmon Treaty, which works from Alaska to British Columbia and down the west coast. Allocations are negotiated. It's a very complex world of policy, which is all just to say that I can't just go out willy-nilly and catch fish in the same way that someone might be able to do in the middle of the ocean with a false flagged factory trawler. It's a really different world where I am. And that is not cheap, right? It's not cheap. And so there is a cost associated with doing business the way that we do it. And then Eric and I also are committed to quality because the fish themselves are sacred, right? These are beautiful, beautiful creatures. They're wild, silvery. Just to behold them, to hold them in your hand, it's just a gift, and it's very special. And salmon that are here have co-evolved with humans, right, with indigenous people for millennia, catching um, and being part of their culture, foundational part of indigenous culture up and down the West Coast, wild salmon. And so I don't want to just come in and catch as many as I can and ship them off as cheap as I can. And these are like diamonds of the sea. So yeah, there's a cost associated with that. How to reconcile that with the fact that people need to eat, and don't always have a lot of money. It's not something I can always solve in the moment. We do donate fish and a generous portion of profits to local groups that work with hungry people here on our island. And we hope that people are networked with groups like that where they live. But it's a problem, right? That we have created an economic structure where we can't get food to people that's both affordable and healthy, and
Mhm.
where workers are paid well, right?
Mhm.
That's not really any of our fault that we're stuck in the system, but I think it is incumbent on us to try to change that system, change those systems, I should say, so that we get closer to those goals.
I mean, I think back to before there was a possibility to ship seafood and things like that. And people would trade. So if there were people that were inland or landlocked and didn't have access to these kinds of foods because, not everybody does obviously, then I'm imagining that these cultures found ways to trade and get it. But I think historically seafood has not been available to everybody. So it may be in some sense there is a, a misconception, a mistaken misconception on our part that we should have access to any food we want,
Yeah,
like pineapples in Texas or bananas in Texas.
right. Yeah,
Um, Globalization has done that to us, where as modern humans, we now think, yeah, I can eat an avocado in
right.
Washington State, like.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that we're probably in a kind of transition time, right? We're in the beginning of a time where that system is kind of coming apart at the seams, and
Yeah.
it's unclear, how it will look going forward. And as a business person, you just try to do as best you can, with what we have. And um, we are in Alaska set up right now to be exporting a certain amount of fish. And we try to do that in a way that is as aligned with our values as we can make it in an imperfect world, in an imperfect economy.
So there was we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but there was a documentary that came out a few years ago on Netflix called Seaspiracy. I personally have not seen it. Corey said you haven't seen it either, right? But um, there's still a question. I have a friend of mine had a question about it, which was basically in the documentary, they talked about wild fish versus farmed fish. And, the farmed fish are eating horrendous food, which maybe we could go into that. But that now even the wild caught fish is contaminated because it will swim to these farmed fisheries and eat what the farmed fishermen are feeding these fish. And I was just wondering, do you have any insight into that or thoughts?
Yeah, Alaska fishers have opposed farmed salmon with a vengeance from the get. I mean, they have understood that farmed salmon threaten their business model by taking something wild, producing it in the factory feedlot of the sea, and pushing out a cheaper commodity. And it did really change the Alaska wild fish markets for sure, the advent of farm fishing. And it does have a large economic, or I should say, a large environmental impact where it's done, and it does also impact the wild fish around it. Not, I don't think as much from feeding as from concentrating disease among the fish and putting a lot of antibiotics into the water. Wild fish who swim through that are um, vulnerable to those diseases, right? But it's not something that we've necessarily won the public debate on, which is sad for me. It's something I thought would be different at this point, over the last 20 years. People mostly just accept that wild salmon are there and farm salmon are there, and that's fine. Usually, when you go to a restaurant, you order salmon, you're getting that farm salmon, but it is often, the flesh is dyed, it's full of antibiotics and chemicals, and the fish themselves have been fed um, more protein than they give. And that protein that they're fed comes from really rapacious, destructive fisheries out in the ocean. So the fact that that's cheaper for the consumer tells you everything you need to know about how we structure markets and the economy, right? It's not cheaper for the environment. It's certainly not cheaper for the impacts to environmental health and human health when you factor it out down the line. But yeah, people are right to be suspicious of that for sure.
So, could you say that your fish, you can't know for certain whether your fish has intermingled with a farmed fish?
Um, there aren't farmed fish allowed in Alaska. So most of our fish, for example, all of our coho salmon, they don't go places where there are farms. So I can say for sure, you know, they're not out there. But I don't think that's the main thing people should be worried about. You know, the thing that I'm more worried about is actual water pollution in Alaska that does affect my wild fish, right?
Mm.
Cruise ships, for example, have exploded in popularity and are a major force in Alaska. People love to get on a big cruise ship, come up the Inside Passage, stop at communities, and the ships are getting bigger and bigger. And for example, they recently kind of cracked down on how polluting they are. Right, they burn a ton of dirty fuel to power those huge ships. And so they're like, okay, you have to scrub it in the stacks so that you're not, you know, producing so much nasty emissions. But then no one noticed that they were taking those scrubbers and emptying them in the ocean, right? So they're putting like really, really toxic, like incredibly toxic chemicals right into Alaska waters. No regulatory framework for that. And then we also have a pretty scary proliferation of like mega mines. Like maybe you've heard of in Bristol Bay the effort to keep a major gold mine, metal mines out of that fishery. It's in a different part of Alaska up here, but mines that size, there's a big push for metals for the electric vehicle revolution and the batteries and all that stuff. And a lot of those metals are up in the mountains above the rivers where our fish are spawning. And
Mm.
so we're seeing those being developed whenever the markets are conducive to it penciling out for the big corporations who do the really huge mines. Whenever the cost of mining in these really remote areas is less than the revenues that they can make, they push and they start building like enormous, enormous mines in some of what we call these transboundary rivers that go between Alaska and Canada. So they can put the mine up in Canada, way up in these huge remote mountains. But if that mine fails, and they store the tailings and behind dams, those dams fail, and this has happened. A lot of that acid mine drainage just comes right down the river and into where we live. So they're really unstable, and they last for a very long time. That instability is there for like ever. That pollution that is created by heavy metal mining. So those are just a few examples, and that's what I would like for people to focus on rather than sort of some things that have been amplified by Netflix, right? Which is again trying to keep eyeballs for profit, not necessarily trying to tell stories that kind of deeply resonate with what's actually happening.
Okay. Can we then? I know this is a little bit maybe of a back leap, but um, can you touch on the difference nutritionally between farmed fish and wild caught salmon?
I don't know that I can speak to in terms of like nutrient density and that kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, or just what would be the general differences?
What I can speak to is just the additives, right?
Mhm.
Because these are concentrated animal feedlots essentially in the ocean.
Yeah.
They are just saturated with drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, so that the fish don't all die from disease that they give to each other, because that's not how salmon live in the real world, right? They're covered in light sea lice and um, passing kind of like nasty things back and forth to each other. They're not looking good when you see them. So you are also ingesting, you know, all those antibiotics and chemicals.
And you would say that
And dye, they dye the flesh oftentimes because they're not out there eating the marine nutrients. They're not getting that pink glow that, so you're also eating the synthetic dye.
Yeah, and is it true that they're also oftentimes infected with parasites?
Yeah, I mean, all things are in the ocean. Like parasites are a part of life. Like if you see barnacles on a whale, or sharks have little things that live on them that eat other parasites. That's just the reality of nature. And we do in our wild fish see various things that come onto the fish, and we pull off. Like you don't see that in the supermarket. Sometimes our customers will see one. There are sea lice that are totally natural. Again, when you concentrate animals in a small area and they're not living the way that they evolved to live, then you get a lot more of that. Then the drugs are used to try to get it off. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
so you would say parasites in fish is just normal.
it is totally normal.
Yeah.
All fish have parasites.
Yeah. What about so do you think that, let's just say, any average random restaurant, I'm thinking like your typical sushi restaurant, they're going to be serving farmed salmon or
Yeah,
a farmed fish, most likely?
unless it says wild, it's usually farmed, and
Oh
that's just
man.
cost. And when you farm fish, you get out of the trouble of having seasons, right? Seasons are, of course, a
Mm,
beautiful part of living on Earth. Fish come on a regular pulse and a rhythm every year, and they have been doing that since time immemorial, and that shapes, the culture of where I live. It's on a seasonal fisheries culture because I live in a fishing town. Right now, people are hibernating. They're doing projects. They're inside. They're not out on the water because the fish aren't running right now. But the farming does kind of eliminate that and bring it into kind of a I guess, monoculture, eliminate that seasonality. So that's easy for a restaurant to keep an order going. It's just far, farming fish works better for a kind of corporate economy.
Oh my gosh. This is just like, this is gut wrenching. I mean, I feel like I knew this, but hearing it makes you think of all the times you've eaten seafood at, I don't know, just a regular restaurant before and thought, ugh.
yeah, so then let's touch on that. Like as consumers, who are living in let's talk about the people who are living in the middle of the country, who are not coastal. Um, because all three of us live in coastal states. Christine, you don't live on the coast, but your state touches the coast, has a coastline. But, what are people to do who live in, say, Missouri or, anywhere sort of in the center of the country
Mhm.
or on the coastline? Like what is the average American to do?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we have to do is recognize that there are as many sort of like answers to that question as there are people, right? Not
Mhm.
everyone should do the same thing. And, you mentioned Missouri. I have a fish club in Columbia, Missouri, and it's important to this group of people. Uh, and they actually drive to St. Louis and pick up boxes of our fish, because that's where Alaska Air cargo flies. It's important to them to have that fish, and they have relationship with us. Obviously, not everyone in Missouri wants to do that, and that's fine. That's totally fine. Like kind of like that get in where you fit in thing. Like if those are your values and you want the fish, there's ways to do it. Like from businesses like mine, that makes sense, a lot more sense. But the idea that everyone should be able to go to the store and get cheap fish whenever they want is maybe an idea we should let go of, right?
Mm. That's how I feel about chicken. It's my understanding that chicken used to be a very expensive protein
Mhm.
because chickens were expensive to feed. And here in the US now, we think that chicken is cheap because it's been made cheap, in the same way that it sounds like farmed fish has been made cheap.
Yeah. And expand that out to everything, right? Clothing,
Yeah.
um, you name it. I think we have to get back to looking at what our values are and where we make our compromises, and being a little bit creative and looking more to like what's directly around us. Like here in Alaska, it doesn't really make sense, in my view, to eat beef, right? it's it's coming from really far away. We don't in Southeast Alaska have cattle farms. It doesn't make sense. Um, but we have a lot of fish here, and there's just you have to come up with your sort of regional cuisine, and even then understand that your neighbor might be doing a little bit differently than you.
So are you eating fish like 99% of the time?
I actually we eat vegetarian quite a bit,
Okay.
um, just because that's how we like to eat. We eat
Yeah.
not we don't have any hard and fast rules, but um, potatoes actually grow really well here, in garlic. So we grow ourselves a year's worth of potato and garlic every year for ourselves, and we eat potato and garlic probably all the time until they run out. Um, yeah.
Wow. That's it.
Oh, okay. So I had a question that we didn't put on the list because I thought of it right before we started recording. And I wanted to ask you your opinion on this. Should people should people be trying to find local fish? Whether that be from a river or if they're on the coast. Um, if at all possible, would it be ideal, I guess, to be trying to find local options?
Absolutely. And there are so many
Yeah.
great organizations, um, that work together to promote that kind of eating. And I just want to plug Local Catch again, is a place where people, I think it's just localcatch.org. I'm sure if you just Google Local Catch,
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for sure.
they network all the different people working on producing local seafood and getting it to market locally. And that's, I think, where people should look first, right? Um, a lot of places are fished out because there weren't strong regulations, uh, for example, on the East Coast for hundreds of years. So we lost a lot. We lost a lot of the native Atlantic salmon to habitat loss. So there aren't always abundant fish markets, but a lot of times there also are. And there's really earnest people out fishing those rivers and seas trying to bring their catch to market.
Yeah, so then piggybacking on that, how do you know w that the fish or the seafood that you're getting is quality?
Mm.
Yeah. I think I think that's where we go full circle back to the CSF model, is if you know the person who's caught catching it, then you can ask them, right? And why wouldn't we all know the people who's catching our fish? It's not hard. Like, as Christine knows, like she could call me anytime and have a question, or if one of her crew members has a question, I'm all ears, love to talk about it. I have time for that. Again, because I've structured my business as a small business that's not trying to like grow and take over the world. I'm just trying to have relationships with people who want to eat the fish I catch. And so
Mm.
I think we've gotten a little bit high centered on the idea of like labeling, like there should be
Mm.
one label that tells me that this is good and this one's bad. And the problem with that is that those labeling is easily co-opted on one hand,
Yeah.
and also pretty expensive and a headache for the producer who really
Oh, for sure. We've had conversations about like the organic label,
Yeah.
specifically, and how that's just almost impossible
yeah
for small farmers to maintain, all of those things.
yeah I just think so often the answer to these really tough questions is relationships. And
Mm.
I love that answer.
we live in this
Oh my
society that
gosh.
individualizes us and wants us to be these kind of like individual consumers. Like that's the model. I have as much money as I could possibly want to go out into online or supermarket space and buy whatever I want. But what we I think need to be turning toward is how can I know more people and have like authentic relationships with them and learn from them, what their values are and where my values meet, and maybe how theirs or mine need to change, for that relationship to work. And that's really what we've tried to do with our business, is just have relationships with people that work for them and work for us.
Mm. So I'm guessing your belief would be that there is not enough fish to feed the whole world and we shouldn't even try.
I think what's true is that our earth is so abundant, and it was I wouldn't say it was because it's not anymore, but it was so brimming with life. And when industrial civilization first took hold and we really started booming with human population, we we made choices as a species, and I don't say all of us, a very narrow set of us, wealthy people, really made choices as to how we would function, um, and how we would be in relationship with the earth, that kind of took away a lot of that abundance and kind of took away that capacity. I think the earth could have supported everyone with seafood at one time, but it's almost like inconsequential, right? Because why would you, if you are in a community in the middle of a continent where you're eating bison and you're catching trout out of rivers, why would you want to import? It doesn't make any sense. We were always living within abundance and trying to find that, which is not to say that like all societies across the history of the planet were in these like Garden of Edens. There's boom and bust for everyone all the time, and migration and famine and natural disasters and all that. But I think it really is true that we've gone from a place of like massive abundance in the ocean, like so many fish, down to very small areas where we've actually protected and have good science on fish runs, and we can take from the surplus of those and feed people. And that's what we're trying to do in this one very, very small place. But I don't have any illusions that that's happening globally. Globally, the situation is very dire.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that in the health community, and for those of us that are interested in those kinds of things, we're closely connected with farmers and um yeah, it's apparent. That's we are so disconnected with our food.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem. But so what could a consumer do to help with this particular situation, specifically like fishing?
Mhm. I think like I think we really, they have that saying, think globally, act locally, but it actually really is true, and it's a good rule of thumb, right? We have to kind of widen up our scope and realize that like everything that we are doing has consequences somewhere else. I buy a new electric vehicle, it needs a giant bank of batteries. The batteries have metals in them. The metals come from mountains and produce toxic byproducts that go into the salmon that Melena's catching. It's complex and it kind of hurts the brain. But if we can shift into, you know, um, thinking about the impacts of our actions, then we realize that we need, in my view, I know this is a little far of an answer from your question, but in my view, we need really strong regulatory frameworks that govern how we produce a lot of the goods and foods that are part of our daily lives. And if we don't have, like a well-staffed agency dotting the I's and crossing the T's and looking at like a big corporation doing its thing up in the mountains where no one's looking, then we do see pollution, right? Like the cruise ship example I gave you, right? We're just trying to catch up on that. And so I think sometimes people are so frustrated by these truths that we're sort of talking about. It's so frustrating that you just kind of want to blow it up and start over and not want to have anything to do with these like big hypocrisies and really like large, powerful forces that are hard to counter on an individual scale. But I just want to insert the idea that like we want, like for you guys, we want our kids to be eating healthy food. We want in general to not have contaminants and not see like fish go extinct because of products that we buy. Then we actually do need these laws that we have on the books. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration. We need those agencies doing their jobs well, and we need corruption like rooted out of them, so that the staff can go out there and like protect us. That's just the reality of it right now. I don't know if that's how it's always going to be, but that's the situation right now. And so I think I see like this force in our society where people just want to like blow them up, like with Bob B. Kennedy, RFK, and the FDA and the milk. He's kind of like, blow it, just get rid of it all, get rid of the laws. Like, but I think we'll then be in a worse position, right? I think we actually need to strengthen and believe in our own regulatory, what I would call regulatory frameworks.
Hey, mamas, do you want to add a new secret ingredient to your kitchen? Are you ready for this? Give Baja Gold sea salt a try today. We know our food is lacking minerals because of the depleted soil, so increase your mineral content of your food by using Baja Gold sea salt.
Baja Gold is an all natural, unrefined sea salt from the Sea of Cortez. This salt is made the way it used to be, sun dried with all of the ocean's minerals intact. No processing, no chemical flowing agents, nothing but pure, unrefined mineral salt.
And because of how and where they make their salt, Baja Gold is naturally lower in sodium and higher in minerals like magnesium and potassium.
Give Baja Gold a try today. Visit BajaGoldSaltCo.com to learn more. Check the show notes for the link and use the code MAM10 for 10% off.
Hey guys, 2025 is the year for you to take control of your family's health. The first step is getting in the kitchen and cleaning out your pantry and fridge. Get rid of all of the processed crap. I can help you with my Real Food, Real Families online course. In just 5 weeks, I will walk you through all of the steps so you can start creating healthy, delicious meals for your family on a regular basis.
Go to nourishthelittles.com and click on the drop down menu labeled courses. Then click on Real Food, Real Families, and we're going to put a link in the show notes for you to use. Then use that code MAM10, that's MAM 10 for 10% off this course.
So, what I'm hearing you say is we need to clear it out of the corrupted individuals and actually put in some honest people and get back to maybe believing in these regulatory agencies again, trusting them again.
Yeah,
Um,
it's hard when things have been so corrupt, right,
yeah,
for so long.
yeah.
But I think we do need to name names and focus on rooting out the corruption rather than destroying our institutions.
Okay, I have a question for the consumer, or on behalf of the consumer, or a couple of questions here. So one is, can we go over because we mentioned labels, you mentioned labels. Can you go over what some of those are and what they mean, if they're useful, or not useful, like putting vegetarian fed on eggs or whatever. Like, it's not a useful thing to put gluten-free on a package of bacon, So like what are some of the useful or not useful labels that we have going?
In terms of seafood, I think like wild gives you a lot of information, right? If something is
And that's
wild.
a label that they're not allowed to use otherwise, right?
I'm trying to remember where we're at right now. It's something that gets fought about in Congress actually quite a bit. I believe like wild labeling is accurate, but then again, there's nobody really checking.
Right. I mean, because farmed salmon is grown in the ocean, right? So like that's so confusing to my brain. I'm going, well, they're in a wild ocean,
Yeah,
you know, and I understand that they're not it's just such a weird thing to think about.
What are they? Are they in cages or something?
They're like in like nets,
yeah,
right?
they're
Like
usually in a
giant.
permeable net pen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But they're in the ocean, so that like you would think that that's still kind of a
Mhm,
good thing.
mhm. Yeah, and yeah, until you remember that this is an animal that evolved migrating thousands of miles every year.
Right, and when you put the label of, like, a
Mm.
CAFO on it, that makes complete sense to me,
Yeah.
that it's a densely populated thing, and they're being thrown food because food is not actually getting into the net for them to eat naturally, and then,
Mhm.
they're so populated in that small little area that they develop all these issues, health issues, and then they have to be drugged, and that all makes sense to me. Okay, but
Well, yeah. So I'm okay. Some of the labels are, for example, wild caught, sustainably harvested, responsibly farmed, pole and line caught. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of
Mhm.
garbage words. What do they mean?
or maybe not garbage words, but what do we
Maybe,
know?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who are listening to this podcast are people who probably really care, right?
Yes, I would assume
So
that that's generally our audience.
for people who really care, your role is not to be the one who's making a 5-second decision in the supermarket over labels. For
Mm.
people who really care, your role is to go shop at your local food co-op or help start one, or go to your local food co-op and ask, where are we getting our fish? Do we know those people? Do we have relationships with those people as a co-op to another co-op or to another CSF? I think we have to get kind of over this idea that someone else is going to do this stuff for us. Someone else is going to
Mm.
reform the food system. We're the ones who care. It's on us.
Yeah.
And turns out that like establishing a relationship with a local food co-op feels good for you and for them. They want to have that relationship. You want to have that relationship. You want to be on a first name basis with the person who is buying your seafood and helping to shape that market. So, yeah, I think um, the history of American society is that we're supposed to be an individual rational consumer, and that's the basis of economics, right? The rational consumer. It's a pretty damaging identity, and it's, I think, truncated us and kind of like held us down a little bit because really we're like very dynamic beings and we evolved in relationship with one another. And I think we have to kind of take back that ability. And for a lot of people, it's natural. I'm sure who are listening to it, they're like, that's me. But a lot of us have that kind of there and maybe don't realize that we could be a little bit more active in um, impacting the world around us through creating relationships and asking questions and trying to actually live our values, understanding that we often can't, but we need to try.
Okay, so then piggybacking on that, because obviously Christine and I are all about creating relationships with your food producers. What are some questions that people should be asking their can we call fishmongers? Can we say, is that like a thing that we can say that's
Yeah.
applicable? Or fisher people?
Yeah, what's the right
Are
term?
fish getters?
Yeah. No,
What are some questions that would help and answers, like what are your questions and then the ideal answer that would help consumers suss out the best kind of fishing operations?
mhm. And I just, as an aside, this has been a debate in the fishing community. Are we past fishermen, right? Because a lot of people like stuck with fishermen for a long time, even who were fisherwomen, who were just like, can we not do like the
Yeah.
change all the words thing? But it really is changing now to, I think, fishers and fisher folk and fisher people.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
What,
Thank you.
the next generations are
I
starting.
like fisher folk.
Yeah, it kind of has a ring to it. Um, and I also like that because I think not to be on like a tangent, but like the word fisherman evokes this image of like a man out in the ocean on a boat and he's alone and there's a storm and he's pulling up the fish, and that's kind of like that myth of the frontier, right? Which it just isn't how things work. Like in my community, it takes like literally a village to keep one boat floating when you think of all the repairs it needs and the people who help process the fish. They come from all over the country and all over the world. They're all the genders. Um, there is a transgender person who works on boats in this community. Like it really is takes a big dynamic community to bring a fish to market. So that's what we mean by fisher people and fisher folk. Anyway, the question was, what questions do people ask?
Yeah, what can we ask? And then what are the ideal answers?
Yeah,
Because it's all well and good to have a question, but you need to be able to know what you're listening for from
yeah. I mean, I think
in those answers.
a question you can't go wrong with is, where do you know where this fish was caught? Like the person who is selling it to you, do you know where it was caught? Ideally, as close to you as possible. Obviously, that's not always possible, and some of us export, and that's just the way it is. But like, do you know where it's caught? Eric and I can usually tell you, yeah, we know we were between these two islands on this day, and this is where we were. Like, I can just show you on a map. I can point my finger to this little point where your fish most likely came from. Might have come from here or here, depending on which week we caught it or whatever. But if you can't get to the answer to that question, then it's hard to sort out all the other questions, because that question is going to like indicate how much the chain of commerce that came to you understands about its source. But I think even in our community, there are people who can tell you where a fish was caught, but they might not be able to tell you how well they treated their workers, if women were safe on their boat, right? Like sexual assault is a major problem in extractive industries. And I would say it's a problem in fishing communities. It's not always safe to be a woman crew. So were women safe on your boat? Were all your workers treated well? Did you dump your garbage into the ocean off your boat? Happens all the time. Were people doing methamphetamines in order to stay awake, in order to like work hard enough to be on your boat? Happening in my harbor, you know? So there's a lot of questions about the fine tuning of culture and matching values that you can also ask, that get more to some of those questions.
And does it matter how it was caught? Like, is that a question that we should be asking?
Yeah, and it's
And I think that would be different for different fish, I would assume.
exactly like,
Because like in Georgia, we've got these giant um what are those called? The shrimp boats that like look like this. They have like these giant arms
yeah,
with the nets.
yeah.
So I'm like I don't know how different that would be, but how important is the way that these fish are caught
Mhm.
to the conversation?
It is important, and it is very regional and species specific. For example, where we live in Alaska, there's a huge controversy around bottom trawlers, as in TRAWLER. I am a troller, TROLLER, trawler, troller. Vastly different boats, right? Trollers are generally small, less than 50-foot boats. We have steel lines that go down into the ocean with hooks on them. We pull up those lines with hydraulics and take a fish off one by one and process it and clean it and put it on ice and store it, one fish at a time. A trawler is a factory that goes out in the middle of the ocean, and it drags the entire water column and bottom of the ocean, and it pulls it up, and it has tons of crew on there. It has tons of bycatch, and that's what's producing like fish sticks for McDonald's. And they
Yeah, that sounds incredibly disruptive
have
to the
incredibly
ecosystem.
destructive. It's poorly regulated. It's a bit corrupt in that the people who make money off of that also pay off senators and representatives and maintain their sort of loopholes for and those people will catch bycatch of king salmon that we catch, and we won't always know how much bycatch they catch. It's very controversial, and people are very upset about it because king salmon are on the edge in some rivers, right? They're localized to different rivers, and in some rivers where they spawn, they are not doing well, and yet we have an indeterminate amount of them sucked up by these massive factory trawlers that don't even use them. So yeah, it does matter. I can tell you on a troller, and that's what a line caught, right? That's what we're doing with the salmon.
Mm.
If bycatch comes up, we put it back. Some fish don't make it, but we're also targeting with our lures the exact kind of fish we're trying to catch. So the bycatch is pretty minimal, right?
Mm.
And the bycatch that we do get in some quantity when we're halibut fishing, we market to our customers, the ling cod and rockfish. And that's why we have those on our menu on our website, because we catch them. Instead of throwing them back dead, we would like to legally bring them to market and create, recipes out of them. And people
Mm.
really like it.
The rockfish are like shrimp, right?
No, they're like fish. They're spiny, white
Oh.
fish, ocean. They can get quite large, quite bright red sometimes. Like
Oh, never mind.
species of rockfish.
What I thought one of your offerings, I didn't get it this year, but I got it last year. It kind of looked like shrimp.
We do have shrimp. Maybe you got shrimp.
Oh, so maybe it was just shrimp. It
Yeah,
was called something different then. I don't remember what the name of it was, but
yeah. We had enough for customer requests for shrimp that we bought some from a local shrimper and
okay.
put them in our fish mixes.
When you guys process it on the boat, what are you doing with a lot of the leftovers? So for example, let's what are you doing with the head? What are you doing with the tails? How many of these fish are pregnant and have eggs in them? What are you doing with the fish eggs? I want to know all these things.
Christine is asking you if you will just send her all of that.
Oh yeah, no, the eggs are delicious. We eat them ourselves. We don't fillet them on our boat. We bring them to town, and we work with an
Okay.
independent business who has professionals who are very good at filleting um, fillet, and various things happen with kind of like what's left behind. Some cuts, like for example, the salmon collars, we save and share with our captains or sell to our customers, and those are very good broiled with like an Asian sauce on them.
Mm-hmm.
We have people who want the fish heads. Fish heads make excellent soup.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of just like the fins and bones that don't go to people get ground up in Petersburg where we live, and turned into fertilizers sold to
Oh, wow.
agriculture.
Mhm.
I would say that's a place where I'd like to see more energy, is creating products out of the waste, because some of it goes
Mhm.
back in the ocean, and that's fine. It's natural, but it also kind of disturbs the nutrient balance of certain places where the effluent comes out. So as much of
Mm.
that as we can divert, we should. We don't always do a great job of it. I mean, I would say we're coming from an industrial era, right, where it was just quantity, big, big company, guy at the top making lots of money, as much as you possibly can, push it through that system. Waste, who cares? We just want the expensive fillets.
Mm.
That's like night and day from how fishing has been in this region prior to that for thousands and thousands of years, which is small community, harvest fish via fish traps on the beach. So when the tide goes out, the fish get caught in hand hewn cedar fences, right? And then you can just grab them, and you're flaying and you're smoking them to preserve them on the beach. And you're saving that smoked, preserved, salted fish for later. And I don't know. I didn't live then, but people are using fish heads. People are feeding what's left maybe to the eagles, who are really happy to eat it here, the bald eagles. Really happy to take that away and enjoy it on their nest with their babies. So,
Mm.
moving from that paradigm to this paradigm, there's a lot of different pathways and things we can do in between, and we're always trying to find more answers to that.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I appreciate that you told us what happens with most of that leftover thing, because I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot in most. Um,
Food industries.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the waste from any product.
Mhm.
Um, Christine, you're gonna have to take this for a second. I gotta go do something.
Her kids are asking for help. Um, so let's go a little bit into talk about the community of where you live specifically. Yeah, I'm actually really curious about the indigenous community and how they lived and how that is playing into your yearly fishing business activities and things that you do.
Yeah, well, I live, in Alaska's Panhandle. So this is the traditional territory of the Tlingit people, and they are here. They are present, and they are um, have always been here. They never left. And I think by population, we're looking at up to maybe 20% of the people who live
Mm.
in Alaska are those indigenous cultures that have not left. And so don't think of them as in the past or, this is like one long through line of culture that they've been here for over 10,000 years since time immemorial, as people often say. We don't really
Mhm.
know because archaeology is not always perfect, but they're always finding things that let us know that these same cultures have been here for a very, 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 very long time and are still here. And in Southeast Alaska, um, Tlingit people and also Haida people who are kind of more on the southern end of our region and into Canada, and also Tsimshian people who live south of us. So we have kind of three cultures. They are organized into tribal communities that have governments, and those governments are organized into central governments. And they also have a unique thing in Alaska in that they're organized into tribal corporations as well. A lot of them, um, because Alaska became a state and part of the Union later than the rest of the country, people tried a different model instead of reservations. Indigenous communities were given corporations, so they have businesses, and so it's just a really kind of a different social ecosystem in terms of tribal people than you might see in other parts of the U.S. But Tlingit culture, language, and people are a big part of culture here, and it's like really incumbent upon groups like me and Eric to be very humble and recognize that we're on someone else's land who have a 10,000-year relationship with a species that we are bringing into a capitalist market, right? So
Mm.
that's something to consider, and we try to be good members of our community and have relationships with these various entities and tribal groups and tribal people and be part of things that are happening. And that's, I think, even makes us a little bit unique in terms of a lot of food businesses are not necessarily based where the food comes from, right? But it's not easy, and it's not, I don't want to gloss it over. I'm not like a perfect like white person who understands, how to not make mistakes or offend people all the time. I'm learning by doing and learning to be in relationship and trying to be humble and learn from when I do make mistakes. You know, how can I make things right? How can I share what I've learned? And that's, been a huge process of not only just having this business, but just being a community member where we live.
Mm. That's so interesting. Um, okay. Do you want to, Corey, do you have any other questions that you want to ask about?
No, I feel like we've covered a lot of really good things, and we've covered, some really practical things for consumers, and then some bigger topics that need to be talked about. Um, yeah, I do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I was wondering if well, two questions. Did you want to share any specific recipes for your fish or just like, how can, if a consumer is going to purchase from you, what are some of your favorite ways to cook your fish in particular?
Well, it's funny you said at the beginning of the show about like spreads, because most of the year what we do have is our smoked salmon, which is preserved and shelf stable, and we actually ship most of it out over the holidays as Christmas presents and holiday gifts that our customers send to people. And that's just like a really easy thing to have in the pantry, and kids really love it. We have actually a collection of videos that people have sent us of their children like devouring smoked salmon,
Yeah.
and saying very cute.
And by shelf stable, you mean like is it canned or is it like a jerky? Like what are we talking
It's
about?
kind of a hybrid. It's a product that a local independently owned processor does that is like a canned fish, but it's in kind of a retort, like a plastic um, package, so that it's a little bit more,
Like a vacuum sealed thing?
yeah,
Hmm.
it's a little more
Yeah.
Okay.
more moist and softer than maybe a canned, what you might be thinking of as like a canned smoked fish. It's kind of like in between. It's kind of its own thing. It's in liquid and it's relatively solid, but it's very easy to mash it up and make fun spreads. And there's really like a million different ways you can make salmon dip or spread and use it on salad and sandwiches. Throw it in, or just throw the smoked salmon in like a frittata or a stir fry. Just a
Hmm.
lot of ways to eat it. So I like to recommend that, just to have that on hand, and you can always just put it down on a plate in front of a child and they will just consume it. And it's just straight
Hmm.
protein and they seem to really enjoy it.
I did not know that it was shelf stable. I put it in the freezer.
Well, I mean, you might have also like it's complex, but we have partially preserved smoked salmon that we also ship frozen. So you might
Oh, okay.
with our fish clubs. But then we have fully shelf stable smoked salmon that we ship USPS directly to your mailbox that
Oh,
does not have to
okay.
be refrigerated until you open it.
So I might actually have the one that needs to go in the freezer.
Yeah.
And actually, so last year it was a totally different color. And this year, it was last year it was maybe like a deeper red. And this year it's kind of like a brownish, I'm trying to think of like the right color
Mm-hmm.
term for it, but it's not as bright red.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's a different fish variety or just a different processing.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors, and I don't know what you got, but sometimes like we smoke up extra king salmon, or maybe there's other species of salmon we've caught. So you might have
Mm.
gotten a little bit of a different species. Also, the different batches that go through the smokeries get sometimes heavier or more processing through the preserving process, and sometimes they change the brine a little bit too. So yeah, there's a lot of variation. Generally tastes the same.
This year, Corey, they offered white salmon or ivory salmon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What?
yeah, I had never heard of it before. I bought some, and it was I've only had two of my packages so far, and it was delicious. But why would salmon be ivory?
It's a genetic variant indigenous to this region that some king or chinook salmon have ivory colored flesh. I don't know that we have
So
a
interesting.
reason for it. It actually tends to be a little bit more tender and has a pretty high fat content, so it's very delicious and very healthy. But it is just like a random genetic variant, kind of like being blind or
Huh.
having different color eyes or whatever.
I served it to my in-laws that one time for dinner, and my father-in-law would not stop talking about it. He was just like, "This is so good. This is delicious."
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it's generally very delicious,
yeah, he was blown away by it.
and
But
Cool.
that's something like over 10 years I didn't expect. A lot of our customers are surprised by like how good the fish tastes, and they just haven't had fish that hasn't gone through kind of like the corporate commerce trucking and thawing and who knows where it came from, different fish getting all mixed up from different places, and doesn't always taste good. It just doesn't always taste good, and you get used to that being like what seafood tastes like. But we're coming from that ivory king salmon that your father had. Eric caught it, he killed it immediately, processed it immediately. And then he walks down into like the hull of the boat where we have ice, and he's packed ice in its belly where he's cleaned it out, and he's
mm,
placed the whole body, in a bank of ice, and that it's just stacked like that. So each fish, and he's done it kind of carefully so he doesn't bruise it or lose the scales. And before doing that, he's hooked that fish up to a hose, blasting water so the blood gets pushed out of the muscles,
Mm.
um, which is actually a pretty key step because that preserves flavor. And then it's coming back here, and these great people with very sharp knives are cutting it up and getting it frozen, and then it goes into a storage facility we have on our island that's actually very unique, that is holding it at -40 degrees until we ship it to you. And so that process is all very fast, and that very ultra cold storage really locks in the flavor. So then when you open it and cook it for someone, they're like, "Wow, this actually is quite delicious." It's like really good. It's like, well, yeah, we've worked quite hard to um, make it that good for you,
Wow.
which is great.
That's so cool. How many fish are you catching a day?
It really depends on what we're catching. Um, Coho, a good day you might catch a hundred, or in the hundreds. So you can imagine
And how long is that season?
how much work that is. The seasons are all kind of overlapping. The coho we're catching mostly for a few months in mostly August for us, July and August in there. King salmon are tightly regulated. We just get a few openings where we can catch them, like a week.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm.
Halibut, we own, a portion of the fishery. That's how it's federally regulated. So we can go and get that anytime. We just
Does that mean like you can catch so many fish?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we typically do that in May or June, and then you're trying to catch as much as you can in like a week by laying, the halibut, you lay down long lines. It's called long lining. You lay a long line down on the ocean with anchors, and the halibut go down there and grab on, and then you pull that line up. Uh,
And you've ideally got like however many fish on this line that you're pulling up. That's really interesting.
yeah, all the big halibut. I mean, they are huge. Some of them. They're all different
Oh, wow.
sizes, but like halibut can be as big as you or me.
Oh my
Whoa.
gosh.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Oh my
halibut fishing is
gosh.
like it's serious business. I mean, they are large animals, and you have to kill them, right? Like people forget this when you're eating it, but like it's a lot of death involved. This is the
Mm,
reality of fishing,
yeah.
um, and I see it being hard on Eric. At the end of the season, he's just like, I'm tired of killing. Like
Mm,
these are animals that have a life, and they've been in relationship with humans as food for thousands and thousands of years. We are doing this dance together, but that doesn't mean it's not a real sacrifice for them
mm,
to be our food. And that's something that
This is something that my husband and I talk a lot about since we raise animals and harvest our own animals.
yeah,
Um, and people ask me, like, how could you possibly harvest that animal that you've had, in your yard for however long? Um, and I always tell them, like, it's not easy to do it. It's not an easy thing, and I think if it were to be an easy thing, you would need to get your brain checked because,
yeah,
that would be like a red flag
yeah,
if it was easy for you. Like, it shouldn't be easy.
yeah,
This is something where you have to have this super respect for these animals
yeah,
and the process and, you know, anyway, I
yeah.
commending that hardness.
And I think it's easy to get stuck right there, right? Like this is the impulse towards being a vegetarian or being a vegan, which I respect. I'm fine with that. But if we get stuck on just that relationship of me killing the animal, and like I refuse to do that one act, therefore, I'm like absolved of the moral consequences of this. That is one way of looking at it. How I try to look at it is we want abundant ecosystems full of healthy wild fish, right? And no matter, I could stop killing fish tomorrow, and we build enough mines in our rivers, we pave over enough watersheds. It doesn't matter, right? Like it's the habitat for us, for the wild animals, that is required for the abundance. You know, we regulate how much we catch in accordance with fisheries science so that it's not the fishing in Alaska that is driving animals toward extinction. It's climate change, changes in the chemistry of the ocean, and all these other factors. So the morality is so much bigger than just the killing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people, and I tend to fall in this camp, who say once you enter into that relationship where you are killing something for you to live, it changes your relationship with that species. And then you care more. You want them to be living. You want them to be living as a society of fish. And you start to understand how your society of humans is making that difficult for the societies of fishes. So yeah, it's worth talking about, you know.
Yeah, the morality conversation, I think, is so nuanced because here we are thinking that we, like you said, have absolved ourselves if we choose to not eat protein, animal protein, when in reality, by saying, okay, I'm not going to slaughter the beef cow, the vegetables that were grown the field had to be cleared. And to be able to grow those vegetables, there was, tons of small animals that had to be killed, and the diversity of the soil to monocrop those vegetables. I mean, it's just like I feel like it's one thing after another that we don't think of.
Right.
And so I just love how you are emphasizing we need to be in relationship with people, in relationship with nature around us. That is the key. That this going to the grocery store and buying our food and thinking that's it is so misguided. There's 50 processes to get that packaged broccoli to you.
Yeah.
And we have to start realizing that as consumers.
Yeah. And I think too, like, as you're saying that, the other thing that's like focusing on relationship gives us is the freedom to make different choices, right?
Yeah.
Like someone could still be like, even, being a vegetarian requires hurting plants, which do feel, and it requires, farming them, which does have impacts. I still prefer that for me and my family. Like, that's fine, you know? But it's when we're joining each other in that place of dialogue and relationship and talking earnestly about our values and being authentic with what we actually want, I can talk with that person and be like, I understand your choices and I respect them. Like, you're not being reductionary and missing all this stuff. You're just choosing different values, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's like ridiculous for us to expect that everyone's going to share the exact same my way or the highway. If you're not doing it my way, then stop doing anything at all mentality. I think we have to open up the ability to let live, but expect that there's going to be some common reverence of like life, right? Like, we want to be pro-life in like the broadest sense, wherever you come to that term from. I think we need to get to a place of like, yeah, we want the earth to be a place that's hospitable to life in the most abundant and diverse ways that we can imagine and that have existed on earth. We want to move toward that end of the spectrum and support anyone who's doing that in their own way. Even if some ways we think are not ways we would do, or some ways are imperfect and not, as good as they could be given the constraints of our society.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're probably at the end of our conversation, and I want to give everybody the opportunity. I want to give you the opportunity to give everybody your information where they can shop or contact you, or maybe if they want to set up a
Fish crew.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A fish crew. If you want to be a fish crew in your area, how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, folks can just go on our website, schoolhousefish.com, just how it sounds, and get on the email list or send me a text or an email. I have stopped using social media in the last few years because I realized it doesn't necessarily help our business and it takes a lot of time to stay relevant.
Yeah.
You guys, I'm sure, know that because you need to get the word out about what you're doing. But for me, I've established that it's better for me to work on relationships with people like Christine, who then work on relationships with people in their community, rather than me putting a bunch of energy into trying to be visible on socials. So really, my website is what I use to connect with people and give them information about me and a place where they can connect with me, which is just schoolhousefish.com.
Excellent. Okay.
Wait, we have to ask about the Iditarod sled dog. P.S. If you've made it this far, Malena, tell us about your dog.
Okay. He should have been the subject of the entire podcast. Alaska has a really great nonprofit called the August Fund for Sled Dogs, and it's this amazing woman up in Anchorage, and she realized that a lot of these dogs that get bred and trained to race in the Iditarod, just really an amazing and athletic feat for sled dogs, end up without homes when they can no longer race, or if they are the kind of dog that didn't work out for racing, or they're for whatever reason, you have to breed a lot more dogs to get those really good racers that win races. And so we adopted one of these sled dogs who was too lazy. He would go out on these training runs where they're all harnessed up with other dogs. Maybe they run 20 miles out, 20 miles back. He would get out and he would just decide not running back, not doing it. And so he would just lay down, and he's big and heavy and very strong, and they would have to like get a four-wheeler out there to bring him home. And
No.
he got traded to a different team, and still they couldn't get him to be competitive, and so he finally got kicked out. And so we adopted him.
Oh.
He's really, really happy with us, and he's the sweetest guy. He's very lazy unless he feels like running. He's a world-class athlete, but like pretty lazy. And so I think there's a good moral in his story of like, you're in the wrong place, for who you are. Like, just sit down, rest, find a better.
Does he go on the fishing boats with you guys?
He sometimes does, yeah. It's not his
Okay.
thing, but he will do it because he's a pack animal and likes to be with the family.
Oh, wow. That is so funny. But I guess you're right. If you're breeding all of these dogs for the race, not all of them are going to make it. Wow.
We can't all be athletic.
I know. We can't all. Oh my gosh. Be Iditarod stars. Woof.
Oh.
What's his name?
Mr. Pilot.
Mr. Pilot. I love it.
Can you send us a picture and we can put him on our social?
I know, right?
Yes, we definitely can. We have
Thank you.
pictures of him on the boat.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah. Well, Malena, thank you so much. This was an incredibly enlightening and interesting conversation. I feel like, wow, we touched on a lot of stuff outside of fish.
Yeah, thanks so much for making this space to talk about food. Obviously, I really care about it, and I'm sure as you guys do, food as like a way to think about our world and the ways that our world can and should change and has changed. So I just am really grateful to be part of that conversation with you.
I'm grateful for what you and Eric do so that I can enjoy my delicious fish. We're going to be eating your salmon tonight for dinner.
Okay,
so
great.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody go find
Schoolhouse
Fish. And if you want some fish, set up a little crew in your area or find somebody who is already doing it. And I think that's all we've got. So thank you for listening. Find us on social. Christine is at Nourish the Littles. I'm at For Nutrient's Sake. And our group podcast one is Modern Ancestral Mamas. And that's it. So thank you very much. Goodbye.